Hello everyone, welcome back to Six Path Weeb. Today, we continue one of the most emotional and intense chapters of this alternate universe story. What happens when the Dark Knight makes a choice that changes everything? What if Batman refused to abandon Naruko, no matter the consequences? Get ready for betrayal, loyalty, pain, and the rise of a bond that even darkness cannot break. This is, What If Batman Refused to Abandon Naruko? Part 4. Before we begin, here's a quick disclaimer. The content on this channel is created for entertainment and discussion purposes only. I do not own any anime footage, music, or visual material used in these videos. Full rights and credits belong to their respective creators and copyright holders. Now sit back, relax, and let the story begin. Not a single word, threatened Naruko, glaring at the smirking Dick, who only seemed more amused by her scowl. Dick tried, and failed, to hide a laugh. What? I think you look pretty stylish, he teased. Naruko groaned dramatically and tugged at the collar of her neat school uniform. This thing is itchy. And remember, Dick added with a playful grin, no pranking. She slumped her shoulders. Ugh. School. Naruko honestly believed her days of sitting in classrooms were over forever. Back home, she had spent years in the ninja academy, listening to lectures she barely understood while teachers sighed at her antics. Of course, she should have known Bruce would insist she attend Gotham Academy with Dick. Dick lightly bumped her shoulder. Come on, it won't be that bad. We'll be in the same class, so you won't be alone. Naruko glanced at him and managed a small smile. Easy for you to say. Still, she followed him toward the towering school building. Gotham Academy looked enormous compared to the classrooms she remembered. The tall windows gleamed in the morning sunlight, and students hurried through the halls carrying colorful backpacks and stacks of books. As they walked, Naruko's thoughts drifted back to her friends. She hoped Sakura was doing all right. She hoped Iruka-sensei wasn't worrying too much. Even noisy old Jiraiya probably missed her by now. A quiet sigh escaped her lips. Dick noticed immediately. You okay? Yeah, Naruko replied softly. Just thinking. Before she could say more, they reached the classroom door. The moment they entered, several students looked up curiously. Naruko resisted the urge to hide behind Dick. The teacher smiled warmly. You must be Naruko Uzumaki. Naruko blinked in surprise at the friendly tone and nodded. Yeah. It's lovely to meet you, the teacher said kindly. I'm Miss Brown. You can sit next to Dick. Naruko and Dick made their way to their seats while the lesson began. All right, class, Miss Brown announced, please open your history books to page 53. A wave of groans spread across the room. Naruko quietly agreed with them. Since she was new, she and Dick shared a textbook. Naruko peeked at the pages filled with maps and dates and immediately felt sleepy. At least Miss Brown seemed nice. That already made this school feel different. A tiny paper ball suddenly landed on Naruko's desk. She and Dick exchanged curious looks. Naruko carefully unfolded the paper. Look behind you. Both girls turned around. A blonde student sitting a few rows back gave Naruko a cheerful wink. Naruko instantly turned bright red. Dick nearly burst out laughing. Still think school's terrible? He whispered. Naruko crossed her arms stubbornly. Maybe only slightly terrible. Dick grinned knowingly. For the rest of the day, Naruko slowly began noticing something strange. Nobody glared at her. Nobody whispered cruel things. Nobody treated her like she didn't belong. Some students even asked her questions during lunch. One girl complimented her bright blue eyes. Another wanted to know if she really practiced martial arts. A boy asked if her whisker-like cheek marks were face paint. Naruko found herself laughing more than she expected. By the time the final bell rang, she bolted from her seat like a rocket. Dick strolled after her, laughing. You really hate classrooms that much? They're too quiet, Naruko complained while waiting outside the school entrance. People are supposed to move around. Dick shook his head. Bruce was serious about the grades, you know. Naruko groaned loudly. I know. No patrols unless I get a B or higher. You'll survive. Barely. A sleek black car rolled to a stop beside them. The window lowered, revealing Alfred's warm smile. Good afternoon, Master Dick. Master Naruko. How was your first day? Dick climbed into the car first. Pretty good. Naruko flopped dramatically into her seat. School is exhausting. Alfred chuckled softly as the car pulled away from the curb. It was only your first day, Master Naruko. New beginnings can take time. Naruko tilted her head curiously. New beginnings? Yes, Alfred replied kindly. Back in your world, children train to become soldiers at a very young age. Here, children are allowed to discover who they wish to become. Naruko stared quietly out the window. Nobody here called her a failure. Nobody expected her to carry impossible burdens. In Gotham, she wasn't known as the loud troublemaker from a hidden village. She was simply Naruko. And for the first time in a long while. That felt nice. Dick leaned back in his seat. Plus, wait until you meet the other sidekicks. Naruko perked up instantly. There are more? Of course, Dick said proudly. There's Speedy, Kid Flash, and Aqualad. Naruko's eyes sparkled with excitement. Kid Flash sounds fun. Dick snorted. Oh, he definitely is. He talks almost as fast as he runs. Alfred smiled at their conversation. Seeing Naruko relax even a little felt like a victory. For so long, the girl had carried loneliness like a heavy backpack. But now, little by little, she was beginning to set it down. Dick glanced toward Naruko with a grin. You know, I think Gotham's going to like you. Naruko smiled brightly at that. And somehow, for the first time since arriving in this strange new world, she thought maybe she could like Gotham too. After arriving home, both girls settled in to do their homework. Well, Dick did his homework willingly. Naruko, on the other hand, had been strongly encouraged to finish hers after Alfred discovered her secret ramen stash and declared a new rule: no homework meant no ramen for 3 whole months. Naruko still had no idea how Alfred had found every hidden cup and packet she owned. It was honestly a little terrifying. To help her study faster, Bruce came up with an unusual training method using shadow clones. Naruko would create 10 clones at a time, and each group would spend an hour studying different subjects. Once the clones disappeared, all their knowledge returned to her at once. It was effective. It was also exhausting. Several long hours later, Naruko and Dick moved to the training area of the Batcave for sparring practice. Dick twirled a bow staff smoothly between his hands while Naruko held a wooden bouquin with a determined grin. Both wore training weights strapped to their arms and legs, making every movement heavier and more challenging. Bruce, dressed in his Batman suit, watched quietly with his arms crossed. He gave an approving nod as the two traded careful strikes and blocks. Naruko ducked beneath one swing of the staff before stepping back with a laugh. Suddenly, the hidden entrance opened. Alfred stepped inside carrying a tray of refreshments, and someone walked in behind him. The sparring match immediately stopped. I have refreshments ready, Alfred announced calmly, and Miss Barbara is here. He handed each of the girls a water bottle before stepping aside. Naruko accepted hers automatically, but her attention had already shifted toward the newcomer. Barbara Gordon, daughter of Commissioner Jim Gordon and one of Gotham's heroes known as Batgirl, smiled warmly at her. Naruko froze. Barbara looked about 14, close to Haku's age, with bright green eyes and long crimson hair that almost glowed beneath the Batcave lights. Naruko's face instantly turned bright red. Dick noticed immediately. A grin spread across her face. For all of Naruko's incredible ninja abilities, she was absolutely terrible at talking to girls she liked. And Dick was definitely going to remember this forever. Barbara offered a friendly wave to the others before turning fully toward Naruko. Hi, she said kindly. I'm Barbara Gordon. On patrol, you can call me Batgirl. Dick lightly bumped Naruko's shoulder. Your turn, she whispered mischievously. Naruko's brain completely stopped working. Beautiful hair, she blurted out. The second the words escaped her mouth, she wanted to disappear into another dimension. Bruce's expression softened with amusement. Alfred politely hid a smile behind his hand. Dick nearly doubled over laughing. Barbara blinked in surprise before lightly touching her crimson hair. A faint blush spread across her cheeks. The compliment sounded sincere. Honest. And somehow, that made it more meaningful. She studied Naruko for a moment. The whisker-like marks on her cheeks gave her a fox-like charm, and Naruko's bright blue eyes reminded Barbara of a clear summer sky. Dick wiped tears from her eyes from laughing so hard. Wow, Naruko, she teased. Barbara totally scrambled your brain. Naruko groaned quietly into her water bottle. After a few awkward attempts at speaking normally again, and silently promising herself that she would absolutely prank Dick later, Naruko finally managed to introduce herself properly. Hi, she said, rubbing the back of her neck sheepishly. I'm Naruko Uzumaki. I guess on patrol you can call me Talon. Barbara smiled brightly and held out her hand. It's nice to meet you, Talon. Naruko shook her hand carefully, trying very hard not to embarrass herself again. Unfortunately, Dick elbowed her immediately afterward. Never knew you had a thing for redheads, Dick teased with a grin. Both Naruko and Barbara turned even redder. Barbara rolled her eyes before lightly stepping on Dick's foot. Ow. That's for teasing, Barbara replied smugly. Then she turned back toward Naruko with a warm expression. It's really good to have you on the team, she said. And welcome to the Bat family. Family. The word echoed softly in Naruko's mind. She glanced around the Batcave, Bruce standing nearby like a quiet protector, Alfred making sure everyone was cared for, Dick grinning despite still rubbing her foot, and Barbara smiling at her kindly. For the first time in a very long while, Naruko felt warm inside. This team felt different. There were no cruel villagers glaring at her. No endless arguments tearing teammates apart. No loneliness waiting for her at the end of the day. Here, people looked after one another. They laughed together. They trained together. They cared. Naruko smiled to herself. Maybe, just maybe, she could get used to a life like this. Thanks, Barbara, Naruko said sincerely. I'm really looking forward to working with you. Barbara smiled again, and Naruko felt her face grow warm all over again. I'm sure you do, Dick joked with a quiet snicker. Naruko smiled and lightly tapped him on the shoulder, making the boy wonder yelp dramatically. Okay. I surrender, Dick laughed, rubbing his arm with an exaggerated grimace. Enough clowning around, Bruce said, though the corner of his mouth hinted at a smile. Everyone get suited up. We're heading out for patrol tonight. The group quickly scattered through the Batcave to prepare. They seem even livelier than usual tonight, Master Bruce, Alfred observed warmly as he gathered empty mugs and plates from the table. It's good for them, Bruce replied. As he adjusted his cowl, his attention briefly shifted to the Batcomputer. Reports of unusual gang activity filled the screen, along with several strange crimes across Gotham. Batman's sharp eyes narrowed thoughtfully before he turned back toward his partners. Robin stood confidently beside Batgirl, while Talon adjusted the straps on her dark cloak. Naruko looked proud in her suit, golden hair tied back neatly and bright blue eyes shining with excitement. Bruce felt a quiet sense of responsibility settle over him. Gotham could be unpredictable, but he trusted his team. More importantly, he wanted each of them to grow into heroes who believed in themselves. Tonight we're splitting into two groups, Batman explained. Robin and I will investigate the recent cases connected to Professor Pig. Batgirl, you and Talon will handle patrol. Keep an eye on the increased gang activity. Batgirl nodded before glancing curiously toward Naruko. Dick had spent nearly an hour earlier describing Naruko's amazing skills. She's basically a super ninja, he had said proudly. Batgirl still wasn't entirely sure what that meant, but she was eager to find out. Robin grinned and sprinted toward the Batmobile. With practiced ease, he flipped into the passenger's seat while Batman started the engine. Moments later, the sleek black vehicle roared out of the Batcave. Naruko watched it disappear with sparkling eyes. No matter how many times I see that thing, she said, it still looks awesome. Batgirl laughed softly before pointing toward her motorcycle. I don't have a Batmobile, but I do have this. Naruko gasped dramatically. That is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Batgirl tossed her a black helmet, which Naruko caught easily. Naruko turned toward Alfred, who was calmly polishing a silver tray nearby. Alfred, she asked hopefully, can I have one too? The butler took a thoughtful sip of tea before answering with his usual kindness. I'm afraid that decision belongs to Master Bruce. Naruko's shoulders drooped instantly. Aw. Batgirl nudged her gently. Come on. Gotham's troublemakers aren't going to stop themselves. Naruko brightened immediately. Right. She hopped onto the Batcycle behind Batgirl while quietly mumbling to herself. Maybe if I get really good grades, Bruce will let me have my own Taloncycle someday. Batgirl raised an eyebrow. Taloncycle? Well, yeah, Naruko explained seriously. I can't call it the Batcycle. That's your thing. And Birdcycle sounds silly. Batgirl burst into laughter. Fair point. As the Batcycle sped through Gotham's glowing streets, Batgirl noticed the sword strapped carefully across Naruko's back. Robin mentioned your sword came from your world, Batgirl said. Is it important to you? Naruko's cheerful expression softened. Very important, she answered gently. My teacher, Hayate Gecko, gave it to me after I graduated from the academy. He was one of the first adults who truly believed in me. Batgirl smiled kindly. He sounds wonderful. He really was. For a moment, Naruko looked quietly thoughtful, but Batgirl quickly changed the mood. So, Batgirl said with a grin, I bet you have some incredible stories. Naruko's eyes lit up instantly. Oh, definitely. Let me tell you about my very first mission. As they traveled through Gotham, Naruko enthusiastically shared stories about Team 7's early adventures. Batgirl laughed at the endless chores disguised as missions. You seriously had missions where you chased a runaway cat? Batgirl asked between giggles. More than once, Naruko admitted dramatically. That cat was secretly a supervillain. Batgirl laughed even harder. Then Naruko reached the story about the bridge builder and Team 7's first big adventure. And then, Naruko continued, blushing slightly, I thought Haku was a girl. Batgirl nearly lost control of the bike from laughing. Naruko. She looked like one. Naruko protested, completely red-faced. Batgirl grinned mischievously. So, am I cuter than Haku and Sakura? Naruko answered without even thinking. Yes. Way cuter. The moment the words escaped her mouth, Naruko froze in horror and slapped both hands over her mouth. Batgirl blinked in surprise before smiling warmly. Thank you, Naruko. Both girls looked away shyly as silence settled between them. Thankfully, the police radio crackled to life. Attention all units, an officer announced. Robbery reported at Gotham City Bank. Suspects are fleeing the scene in a black van. Batgirl straightened immediately. Looks like patrol just got interesting. Naruko grinned eagerly. Does Gotham ever have quiet nights? Not really, Batgirl admitted. The Batcycle accelerated through the busy streets as people pointed excitedly at Gotham's newest hero. Naruko leaned forward slightly as they heard tires screeching somewhere ahead. They're making this way too easy, Batgirl said. Naruko's grin turned playful. Hey, wanna make things interesting? Batgirl smirked. What kind of interesting? Naruko pointed ahead dramatically. First one to help stop the robbers wins. And what does the winner get? Naruko crossed her arms proudly. Lunch. The loser buys. Batgirl laughed. You're on. Perfect, Naruko declared confidently. Prepare yourself, Princess of Gotham. Batgirl smirked at Naruko and tried to ignore the warm blush spreading across her cheeks. If Supergirl could see her now, she would never stop teasing her about it later. Batgirl cleared her throat and glanced back at the cheerful blonde ninja with a grin. Okay, you've got a deal, Bird Girl, Batgirl joked playfully. Naruko laughed brightly before springing from Batgirl's motorcycle onto the side of a nearby building. She bounced from rooftop to rooftop with amazing speed and balance, her golden ponytail fluttering behind her in the night breeze. Batgirl whistled in amazement and revved her motorcycle to keep up. You make that look way too easy. Batgirl called. Naruko flashed her a thumbs up. Years of ninja training. Just then, a speeding car swerved wildly around the corner ahead of them. Batgirl narrowed her eyes. Looks like trouble. Naruko crouched low on a rooftop and focused carefully. With one mighty leap, she launched herself through the air and landed neatly on top of the moving car with a loud thump. Inside, the startled robbers yelped in surprise. What in the world? One cried. Naruko giggled. Hi there. The car wobbled slightly as she tapped firmly on the roof. The startled robbers bumped their heads together and groaned dramatically. Batgirl rolled her eyes with a grin. Show off. Naruko placed her hands on her hips proudly. A little. One robber tried to open the door and escape, but Naruko quickly flipped upside down in a graceful handstand and kicked the door wide open. The man tumbled harmlessly into a pile of empty cardboard boxes stacked beside the road. Oof. He groaned. Why are there boxes everywhere? Good city planning? Naruko guessed. Another robber nervously pulled out a revolver, but before he could even point it, Naruko gently twisted the weapon from his hands and tossed it safely into a nearby trash bin. No dangerous stuff tonight, she said firmly. Then, with a playful grin, she pointed dramatically. Get over here. She grabbed the man by the jacket and lightly tossed him onto a patch of soft grass beside the road. He landed with a surprised squeak. The driver panicked and slammed the brakes too hard. The car rolled to a stop against a mountain of garbage bags behind a bakery. Flour exploded into the air like a snowy cloud. Batgirl burst into laughter as the robbers stumbled out covered head to toe in white powder. You guys look like powdered donuts. Naruko laughed so hard she nearly fell over. One of the robbers grumbled, "This is the worst robbery ever." Batgirl parked her motorcycle and hopped off. Honestly, trying to rob a bank in Gotham is already a terrible idea. Naruko nodded wisely. You'd probably have better luck selling cookies. The robbers looked at each other thoughtfully. That actually sounds nicer, one admitted. Batgirl blinked. Wow. Naruko accidentally solved crime with baking. I have many talents, Naruko declared proudly. Soon, the police arrived and safely collected the robbers. Nobody was seriously hurt, though several of them still had flour in their hair. Batgirl crossed her arms with a smile. Nice work, Naruko. You handled that really well. Naruko rubbed the back of her head sheepishly. Thanks. I'm still getting used to being part of a hero team, but I think I like it here. Batgirl smiled warmly. You fit in just fine. Naruko suddenly snapped her fingers. Oh. That reminds me. Batgirl immediately looked suspicious. Oh. Naruko grinned from ear to ear. I won our bet. Batgirl sighed dramatically. I knew this was coming. Fine. What do you want? Naruko raised both fists excitedly. All you can eat Korean barbecue. Batgirl laughed. You really never stop thinking about food. Being a ninja is hungry work, Naruko replied proudly. The two heroes shared a laugh before heading off together into the glowing Gotham night, already arguing about which restaurant had the best dumplings. Dear YouTube family. That's all for now. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more content. Thank you for your support. Regards. 6 Path Weeb.